So are you ready for some questions there?
Yeah, sure.
Let's take it all the way
Should I
back.
pull my Jewish story?
Yeah, bring that baby out.
All right, let me
Yeah.
button this. I even put a chai on here the other
Yeah,
day.
such a good man.
It's up here. Somebody sent me a chai as a present, so I put it together with my diamonds.
It's old school bling, Larry.
Yeah, it's right, old school bling. I liked it. Okay. Hit me, baby.
You weren't always known as Larry Harlow. What was your birth name?
My birth name is Lawrence Ira Kahn, K-A-H-N, which probably wasn't my real name from the old country. You know how things get messed up in Ellis Island when the immigrants came here. It was talking to my eldest living relatives. They say my name was Koshe, K-O-S-H-E with an umlaut. So it could have been Koshe, became Colin, became Khan, became this, and I became, my father's father became Khan. There's a lot of Khans around, you know. There was Ali Khan, remember him? There was Garbage Khan, I remember him too. I used to say, when the garbage man used to come, I used to bring in 2 Khans. No. That's how poor we were.
Where were your grandparents from?
My father's side was from a little town called Galicia, which is a little south of Vienna, Austria. And my mother's family were from Russia. They came here in the very early 1900s, and my folks were born here in the early 1900s.
And where were you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
Can you tell us what it was like kind of as a child growing up in Brooklyn?
Growing up in Brooklyn was growing up with all Jewish kids. I mean, it was wonderful. I think there was one African-American kid in my public school and one Hispanic kid in my public school class. But then I decided to go to Music and Art High School, which was like a superior school, and it meant getting on a bus for half an hour and then on a train for an hour going up to 137th Street in Manhattan. And it was a schlep every day, you know, for spending 3 hours in public transportation. And then besides having your regular academic classes, you had 4 classes of music every single day. So you're in school, you know, a good 8 hours a day, plus 3 hours traveling, so it was like 11 hours every day for 4 years. But I was thrown into a mix of very talented and very Jewish people. I'd say the school was 70% Jewish, mainly because the Jewish people supported the arts and gave their children an artistic education, whether it was being an artist, you know, drawing, or they went into architecture and they went into painting or you know, commercial art or whatever it was, or music, and all different kinds of forms of music and voice and entertainment. So here I was thrown into these 1,600 kids who had the same interests that I had, and it was very enlightening, especially because the school was in the middle of this cross culture in Manhattan that was going on at the time. I'm going back now to the mid-50s, where I had on my left side the Apollo Theater, I had on my right side CCNY, Bird Lives, Lewiston Stadium, a lot of jazz, a lot of bebop, and it was in the middle of Spanish Harlem. And as I would walk up these 3-4 blocks from Broadway up to Convent Avenue, I would pass by all these little bodegas and these little mom and pop record stores and hear this Latin music being played. At that time it was very simple, early Pres Prado, early Tito Puente, Jose Cubello, Norma Morales, you know, the songs were very simple. 1, 2, 3, together, 1, 2, 3, vacilo, que rico, vacilo. They really didn't have too much meaning to them. They were kind of like all party songs, and but the rhythms were infectious. And I, of course, was more intellectual, and I wanted to really play bebop. My father was a musician, and he took me to all the clubs on 52nd Street and all the jazz at the Philharmonics when I was a child, and to all the Broadway shows also, you know, to The King and I and My Fair Lady and Damn Yankees and etc., etc. So I had a little of both, plus he worked at the Latin Quarter, so I got a chance to see Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis and Sophie Tucker and Joey Brown, etc., etc. And got a chance to hang out with Barbara Walters when she was a teenager. So we used to sit in the spotlight booth and watch all the new productions that came in. And the Latin Quarter was kind of like before Vegas, you know. It had the showgirls with the feathers and the pasties and et cetera, et cetera. And it was very, very exciting for a young kid, you know. And then I kind of started playing with my father when I was like 13 or 14 and kind of like passed him by musically and had to make a decision what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be a bebopper. I wanted to play bebop. I wanted to play jazz. And, that was the most creative form of music that I knew. But in order to play bebop, in order to play jazz, you had to be African American or be an intravenous drug user. Now, since I was neither, I found it very difficult to break into the jam sessions and the jazz scene here in New York, especially for the younger guys. But there were some African American musicians that were playing Latin American music, and they would play these Cuban stocks, you know, printed on these old recycled paper. Don't forget, Cuba was still open. We were still getting music there. We were still able to buy records. Some Cuban bands was still coming to the Palladium in New York, and I got a chance to see some of them live in person before the blockade. And so I started, they said, "Do you know how to read music? We need a piano player." I said, "Sure." So I went to the first rehearsal of a band called Hugo Dickens up on 145th Street, and in the band with Pete LaRocca, who became Sonny Rollins' drummer, and Phil Newsom and Barry Rogers, who eventually went into Latin music business also. And it was a big band with like 3 trumpets and 3 trombones and saxophones, and I read the music, and the music went boom, ching, boom, boom, ching, boom, boom. They said, "Wow, you played terrible, you know." I said, "But I'm just reading what's on the paper." And they said, "No, you have to learn how to interpret that." So I felt very bad. I ran out and I bought some albums. I bought like a Joe Loco record and a Norm Morales record, who were very fine pianists, and memorized their solos note by note, and then sat down and analyzed how this music worked. And once I understood Clavi, how Clavi fit into this music, the intellectual part of me kind of broke it down into its components, and to me it was very simple kind of stuff, and I got really good at it. And then you started one band, and you go to the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and spent my summers in the Catskill Mountains playing in different rumba bands. They used to call them rumba bands, because there was an orchestra. The Catskill Mountains were an area of about maybe 100 hotels, about an hour and a half north of New York City. That the larger hotels usually had 2 orchestras playing. One would play the shows and play American music, and the other was called the rumba band, or the relief orchestra. And we would relieve the main orchestra and play for dancing, mostly cha-chas and mambos and rumbas and merengues and stuff like that. And so we started off with a little 4-piece band. Next summer it was a 5-piece band, then 6, and then 7. And kind of like built up a little reputation in the Catskills. And we got a chance to play. We made $100 a week with room and board, and had a lot of fun, and it was a great experience. And when the blockade started in Cuba, when the Cuban Revolution happened, I had gone to Cuba on a little Christmas vacation while I was in high school, and kind of stepped off the plane into the musical paradise. You know, and here was a band playing on every corner. There was a band playing in every restaurant. There was the free TV, free radio broadcasts every single day, and this was the real deal. I mean, this was not the Catskills. This was real Latin music at the time, and I'm going back 1957. So I stayed for my first vacation and went with a whole bunch of guys who we called Mambo Nicks. Well, the Mambo Nicks were a bunch of young Jewish guys that worked in the Catskills. Either they were bus boys or waiters or lifeguards or social directors or dance instructors or things like that, but they were into the mambo, and they were into going to the Palladium, and they were into Spanish girls and Spanish women and Spanish music. And of course they dragged me along, and I went with them, and we just stepped into musical paradise, and it was just wonderful. I returned, after New Year's Eve, the first year, and decided to go back again after I finished high school, and wound up staying on and off for about a year and a half, enrolling in the University of Havana and hanging out with all the musicians and getting to really understand the music, not only from the dance aspect and from the musical aspect, but from the religious aspect also, and getting my Spanish together and learning all about the roots of Afro-Cuban music, which of course came from Africa via the slave trade, etc., etc., etc. I got into the Yoruba religion a little bit. I was permitted to go to some bembes and some tokes, but was not really permitted in the secret ceremonies. And I got very curious about the religion, and much later on, in 1975, I became a santero, and I got into the secret ceremonies. And I have my godchildren. It's kind of like when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and kind of protect myself and make everything equal so that nobody can mess with me, spiritually. So I protected myself and gained a lot of respect from the Cuban people and from the Hispanic people. It's another story. But the castles were fun. It was like going to school. So when the embargo started in 1960, the musicians that were playing around New York City decided to play Cuban music because we couldn't get any records. We couldn't have the bands coming here anymore. We couldn't learn from them up close. So Pacheco would form a charanga, Charlie Palmieri formed the Dubonnet. Everybody went more on the Cuban feel. And don't forget, the 60s were a time of revolution in this country. There was, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the Beatles, and Woodstock, and the war in Vietnam, and the Civil Rights Movement, and the Black Panthers, and the Young Lords, and there was just so much going on in the 1960s. It also happened with Latin music, too. What happened was, the musicians were not satisfied with playing songs that had silly lyrics, that had lyrics with no meaning, and they wanted to say something. The mixture of Afro-Cuban music with New York bebop, with New York jazz, or with more sophisticated musicians, really opened the music up. And when I say that, I mean that instead of playing a simple 1-4-5 progression, Latin music basically harmonically was very simple. We now added a 6th and a 7th and a 9th and an 11th and an augmented 13th chords. The arrangements got more sophisticated. The chords got more complex. The composers started writing songs about what was happening at this particular moment in this country at this time. We wrote songs about humanity, songs about love, songs about the war, songs about revolution. It was real song forms. Instead of, come on, let's go out and party and have a good time, we were writing about humanity and what was going on. So the arrangements and this and that and the new sound all came together in the late 60s, and somebody threw a tag on it and they named it salsa. There's many different stories where the word came from, but let's just say the word came in. Tito Puente used to say, salsa, I put that on top of my spaghetti, meaning tomato sauce, but really what salsa was a combination of Afro-Cuban music mixed with New York bebop, with a little New York slickness thrown in. And all these newly arrived immigrants, the Puerto Ricans, the Cubans, and the Dominicans, and the South Americans, and just arriving in New York at all the same time in the late 60s and early 70s. And we had a built-in audience for that kind of music. So I had a sound in my head about creating a new band in the mid-60s, utilizing trumpets and trombones. Nobody had done that before. There were bands with saxophones and trumpets, there were bands with trombones and flutes, or violins and flutes, or 4 trumpets or 4 trombones, but never trumpets and trombones together. I kind of thought that by adding that third element, that third layer of counterpoint, would make the music a little more interesting. So I started writing original music for this type of sound in 1964. And 1965, I got my first record contract with a newly formed label called Havana Records, which was owned by Johnny Pacheco, who was a wonderful Dominican musician, but played more Cuban style, and this Italian attorney named Jerry Masucci, who in my first record contract included a divorce from my first wife. So it was very simple, easy. We got no money, but I got a divorce out of it. So that was my first album. The main thing was they never paid you any money. You know, you always got a gold record or a trophy or a placa. But the royalties were very few and far between. But we didn't care. I mean, my rent was $47 a month rent in 1965. Who cared? Like we'd make $20 a night playing, and I'd work 5 nights a week, and I'm $100 a week. I could have been a rich man today. Next question. Are you going to edit this?
All I asked you was your name. Okay. That was the best answer ever.
Well, I told you I'm a good interview.
So
I answered all your questions.
Yeah,
all right,
thank you,
back
good night.
Can you tell us a good Barbara Walters story?
But to this camera.
Barbara was about 10 years older than me, I think, 8 years older than me, something like that. But Barbara Walters' father was named Lou Walters, and when my father started playing in New York, he had the band at the Havana on the Green in New York, in Central Park. And Barbara Walters, this is right before World War II, or during World War II, and my father had a little trio playing there, and this is after his radio days and his vaudeville days. And Barbara Walters' father, Lou Walters, spotted him there playing and said, "Listen, I'm opening a new nightclub. It's called the Latin Quarter, and I'd like you to come and be the relief band, the mambo band, the rumba band, whatever you want to call them, at this new club." And my father wound up playing there about 22 years at the Latin Quarter. And he increased the band to a 6-piece band, and he was more like a continental orchestra. In other words, if somebody from Italy came in, he'd play an Italian song. Somebody from Spain came in, he'd play a paso doble. Somebody from Texas came in, he'd play Deep in the Heart of Texas, and he would keep everybody happy and everybody dancing, and would be the relief orchestra, and come home 4 o'clock in the morning and lean over my bed and give me a kiss, and I'd smell the scotch on his breath. But he was a good time party guy, very handsome gentleman, and never wrote a check in his life. My mother took care of all that stuff and took care of the household. My father just played music and had a good time. But he was making $600 a week during the war when people were making $50 a week. So we lived pretty well. I mean, we weren't rich or anything, but upper middle class, I would say. And he gave me a good musical education. And he always told me, "Don't be a musician." So of course, the more he said, "Don't be a musician," the more I wanted to be.
And you met Barbara Walters at the Latin Quarter?
What kind of,
Yeah,
what kind of woman was she?
Excuse me?
What were your memories of her?
Bitchy, and she was much older than me, so she kind of picked on me most of the time. But we sat in between these huge follow spots. It was these huge, big spotlights, and so I had a spotlight on each side, and then Barbara Walters on the other side of the other spotlight. And these things would get really hot, and so here we are, sweating and schwitzing in between, trying to watch Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis from the very top of the Latin Quarter to see down. You could see the whole place and the whole stage. And this happened to every act that came in, because my father wanted me to see everybody I could. So, to see Sophie Tucker and Joey Brown and Eddie Cantor and all the great Jewish comedians, Myron Cohen and all those, besides the Catskills, the Latin Quarter was the place in New York to be seen. And Barbara was very cordial to me. I'd say she was cordial mainly because I was much younger than her, but she became what I thought she'd become. But she made a very nice living, and she's still going strong now, pushing 80 years old.
I don't know why I remember a story about her pantyhose
No.
that you told us. You told me once something about backstage.
No. The thing was that here I was small, I was short, and my mother said I weighed 49 pounds for 12 years, but that's not true. But I was very skinny and very, very slight of build. I used to walk into these dressing rooms with these 6-foot tall models, the girls that came out with the pasties and the feathers and here were their costumes all lined up. I must have been 12, 11 or 12 years old. And I used to sniff the costumes because they all smelled from these wonderful perfumes. And so I used to go around sniffing, I wouldn't say their pantyhose, but sniffing the costumes in backstage. And there were a lot of them. There must have been 24, 25 of them tall girls, and then another 24 or so of the short dancing kind of, the dancers, the dancers like the Rockettes, you know. And so there are lots of women around, and they said, "Oh, what a cute little boy!" And they hug me to their breasts and stuff. And I said, "I like this place. I might come back here again." So maybe that's why I became a mamito, a woman. I became a womanizer. I was kind of popular with the ladies most of my career.
You're known as a piano player, but when you, as a child, you played lots of other instruments, correct?
Well, actually, I started out playing the piano. My father was a bassist and a vocalist, and he also was actually originally a saxophone player. But when his lungs got collapsed, he switched over to the bass and became a bass player and a singer and a band leader. And his brothers played with him in his orchestra too, and so kind of my whole family, my whole father's whole side, were all very musical. And my father's father was the theater critic for the Daily Forward, which was a Jewish daily newspaper here in New York. And then he became a prompter in the Jewish theater. So you know those little guys that sat in this little shell at the beginning of the stage, and we forgot your lines, he'd tell them the lines. And then he was a piano player for the silent movies also. So it was a very, very theatrical kind of family. One of my father's brothers became a comedian. You know, one played the violin, one played the accordion, and his sister played the piano, and my mother played the piano and sang. You know, so there was always music around all the time. When I got to music in high school, at 13 years old, when you entered as a piano player, they would say, you'd have to learn another instrument. Because if you were a trumpet player and you came into music and art as a trumpet major, they would teach you the piano. But when you were a piano, they would have to teach you a secondary instrument. So the person who gave me the exam said, "You're an oboe." I said, "What's an oboe?" I had no idea what an oboe was. And so for 4 years I walked around like this with my lips like this, shaving reeds and making reeds all day long. And I got pretty good at it, you know, all city orchestra and the whole thing. Got a scholarship to college on the oboe, which didn't help. I really hated the instrument. It was kind of sounded like a sick duck, you know. But piano was my main instrument. But I played the bass because I always had the bass around the house, and I used to fool around with the bass. And then from the piano, I went to vibraphones, and then started picking up Latin percussion instruments. And then when I started going to Palladium and collecting Tito Puente's old drumsticks and buying a pair of old timbales and practicing listening to Latin records. But I played the flute, and I played and my brother, of course, I have a younger brother named Andy, who became a saxophone player. He played the piano first and then switched over to saxophone and flute and vibraphone. So I had a set of vibraphones and I had a set of piano, so I wound up playing a lot of instruments.
Who was your biggest influence as a piano player?
Wow. I would say Art Tatum. Art Tatum was a very rotund, blind, black, African-American pianist from the 40s, 50s, 60s. And my father took me to see him to play one night at the Hickory House in New York on 52nd Street. And I was about 12 years old at the time. And I sat down and listened to this man play, and it really, I couldn't think as fast as his left hand played. Now, you know, everybody if you're right-handed, you know, you have a fast right hand, the left hand kind of like waddles along and plays some chords here and there. But this man's left hand played as fast as his right hand played. And I just sat there and I said to myself, if I practiced every waking hour of my life, I can never be that good. So why try and play jazz? I could never surpass this man. So he kind of influenced me to go into Latin music because I knew I could never be as good as him. And then I said, and he's blind, and he can't even see what he's playing. And so I would close my eyes and just listen to him, and I couldn't even think as fast as he was playing. He just was an incredible pianist. Even to this day, there are very few people that come close to him.
When you started listening to a lot of Cuban music actively, and especially once you went to Havana, were there Cuban piano players who you kind of heard that you said, that's the style or that's the...
Oh, most definitely. I was a big fan of Arsenio Rodriguez. Arsenio Rodriguez was this rather rotund, blind Cuban musician whose parents were born in the Congo. And he was kicked in the head by a mule when he was 8 or 9 years old and lost his sight. But he was he played the tres, the Cuban tres, which is equivalent to a 12-string guitar, more or less. And he played the congas and he played the bass. And he sang. And he was a prolific composer. But his big claim to fame was that before him, the music in Cuba, there were these charanga bands with the violins and the flutes that came out of the Spanish courts, and there were these big orchestras with saxophones and trumpets. And then there were these little sextetos and septetos, which had one trumpet, a guitar, a bongo player, or two guitars and two singers and a guy playing the claves. And that's where the music came from. There were no conjuntos. Conjuntos meaning a small band with horns. Arsenio added a piano to the sexteto, septeto format. And then he added a conga drum. Can you imagine a Latin band today without a conga drum in it? Arsenio put this conga drum in Latin music. Then he added a second trumpet, then a third trumpet, then written arrangements. Most of his songs had double sentido, double meanings, so well as his lyrics. I mean, he'd be singing about, look out, here comes the shark's coming in the room. But he's not singing about a shark, he's saying, watch out, your wife just came through the door, But only the inner circle of the people in the band knew what he was talking about. And if you listen to a lot of his lyrics, they're very comical and very topical about what was happening back in those days. And so out of his band sprung all these other bands. He had a great piano player called Lili Martinez, who influenced me a lot. Also the brother of Cachao, was named Peruchin, who was the first man to use the word mambo in a song. He was an excellent pianist. Cachao was a protege. He was playing with the symphony when he was 9 years old in Havana as a bassist, but very great musical family. And of course later on, there were, Nora Morales, Pres Prado, who everybody thought Pres Prado was a trumpet player because of his hit, it's Cherry Pink, it was a big trumpet solo, but he was a pianist, and he was kind of like the Cuban Thelonious Monk. He used to play very dissonant chords. He used to play with his head, with his elbows, with his feet, with anything he could. And he was a very wild man on stage. And he influenced me a lot in my arranging and my writing.
Did you come across Joe Quijano?
Who was that?
Joe Quijano.
No, not at all.
In Cuban music, obviously, you've mentioned this word twice now. Clave is the key rhythmic foundation and time foundation, yet it's also kind of a way of life. I mean, it's a way of being at the same time.
Yeah, if you go to Havana, you see people walking in Clavi in the street. The same way if you go to Rio, you see people walking kind of like very somber-ish in the street. Or go to Cali in Colombia. Cali is a city of rumba, and the people just kind of walk with the sway that fits right in with the music. Clave is the basic underlying rhythmic factor. There are many different kinds of claves, many different kinds of musics, but the basic clave, of course, came from Africa and from African music and from Western Africa, and specifically Nigeria, the Lagos region of the Lukumi country of the Yoruba people. And it's the basic foundation for all the rhythmic structure in music. And once you understand how that falls, it's very easy to get into the music, a lot easier to get into the music. Because all the accents fall especially on the second bar, on the fourth beat of the second bar. Clave is a figure of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And it's that fourth beat that the dancers click on to. The second beat and the fourth beat. Everybody says, do you dance on 2 or do you dance on 1? And That's what they mean. Most people would dance on the first beat of the Clavi, but there is no beat on the first beat of the Clavi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And so that's kind of like bastardizing the dance. But the real dancers that really know how to dance start on the second beat, because that's where the pull is, and then especially on the heavy fourth beat on the second bar. Doesn't matter, just have a good time with it.
Was it?
Hold on, Mr. Harlow, can I ask you, even if Roger asks you a question, can you answer Josh? Because it looks strange when you're looking.
I'd rather go here because I talk to the pretty lady.
Yeah, well,
I try.
could you? What was your rhythm of life growing up in Brooklyn before it was Clavi?
Oh, it was always clubby, actually. Actually, I played basketball and baseball with all my friends. I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of young guys my age. Most of them went on to become scientists or doctors or lawyers or very professional people. I still see some of them. I'm still friends with some of my friends from public school, from kindergarten. And I don't mean 1 or 2, I mean 10, 12, or 13 of them. And here we are, we're 7 years old already, So I went to play in Miami, actually it was Pembroke Pine or Fort Lauderdale somewhere. I played in this little nightclub, and it was like revisiting the Palladium again. Here are all these people now in their 70s, and they're still dancing. And I recognize a lot of them still. They were older, but I know you from 1956, and I know you from 1958, and I ran into a lot of people I hadn't seen in so long at this dance hall that I performed in. But most of my friends are already retired, living in Florida, and having a good time. So I have a place in South Beach, and my wife and I vacation there, and we all get together and we relive old times and have a few yucks. And they're all Mambo Nicks. They all still dance to Mambo, and they all still have a good time. But the neighborhood was mostly sports, but I was the principal's favorite. He would bring me into his office to sing a song or play the song on the piano for him. But I was very happy to get out of Brooklyn.
Obviously, with your father's background and in the musical world he traveled in, I mean, Jewish music and Yiddish theater was familiar to you. What did your family say? Like, oh, what are you doing going so far into the Latin world? Did it seem like a natural extension?
I was already gone. I was already gone from the household. But I grew up with Yiddish music, and my grandparents spoke fluent Yiddish all the time, and my mother and father both spoke Yiddish. And, you can take the boy out of Brooklyn, but you can't take Brooklyn out of the boy. So I'm there, and when I did that show for you guys last year at Lincoln Center, playing all that music brought back a lot of memories for me. Not that I lost my roots or anything like that, but I hadn't played it in so long that it was just so wonderful to do it again. Matter of fact, Irving Fields replaced my father at the Latin Quarter. When my father left in 1962 or 63, the next band that came in was Irving Fields. So I didn't know who Irving Fields was, and et cetera, et cetera.
Which artists from the Yiddish world, if any, do you remember?
I remember Menashe Skolnick and Molly Pecan, and I went to the Jewish theater. My father took me to the Jewish theater. Not that I understood everything that was going on, but I did appreciate the music and the dance and the whole thing about it. And of course, my grandparents were very kosher, and I had fish swimming in my bathtub till I was 15 years old because I ate like a filter fish. And my grandmother would do it from scratch and buy the live fish, and then I'd go to take a bath, and there'd be fish swimming in my bathtub. And she baked her own bread, and we went to synagogue, and I got bar mitzvah, and I did my whole thing. I'm still very Jewish underneath it all. And I married a wonderful Jewish lady. This is not my first marriage, but this is my last. and who understands my Jewish sense of humor and appreciates the Jewish roots, because she came from the same. She was of Hungarian background, but still, her folks spoke a little Yiddish too.
Did I hear you correct before that you enrolled at the University of Havana?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
The University of Havana had a wonderful music department, and matter of fact, outside, or not outside, but directly across the street from the music building, was a coffee shop. And in this coffee shop was an upright piano, and they had an acoustic bass, and a set of timbales, a set of congas, and the music students would go there for lunch and to hang out, and there'd always be this constant descarga, this constant jam session going on. Jerry Masucci, who started, Fabio was also at the University of Havana, and was working for the, I think the tourism bureau in Havana, trying to bring more tourism to Havana. I really wasn't friendly with him then, but he was there at the same time. Also Jose Flores, and I met a lot of wonderful people. Fernando Ortiz is probably the most well-known of the Cuban educators in the university, and I happened to take a couple of classes with him, and that's how I got interested in the bata drums, and that's how I got interested in the religious music of Nigeria, and got into the Lukumi religion, and it was just wonderful. The most wonderful thing about Havana was being able to go to all these radio broadcasts and television broadcasts. Well, it was the very beginnings of black and white TV, and they needed an audience. It was live audiences, so they would let people in for free. And then you'd see trios on every corner, and you go into every restaurant, had a trio, a quartet playing, all the bodegas, even the grocery stores had live music. But then there was, of course, the Tropicana and all the nightclubs and stuff like that. So there was lots of music everywhere. Carnival was exceptional, especially in Santiago. And once I made friends with the professional musicians, it was easy for them to go with them or to find out where they were playing and go and see them play. And then when I got really close to them, they would invite me to go on their Ricky buses, their band buses, and go to other provinces in Cuba, to Matanza and Camagüey and Oriente, to hear the bands play on these different weddings or dances or whatever they were playing. And I got to know, because the second time I went back, I was a lot smarter. I came back with a tape recorder. There were no little cassettes then. I'm talking about a 90-pound Webcore reel-to-reel, 5-inch reel-to-reel mono tape recorder that I schlepped all over Cuba, and cameras and music paper, and just interviewing people and talking to people, and just soaking up as much information about the music that I could, and the history of the music, which was very interesting. And I had a great time there. It was great education. When I kept hearing the bombs exploding on the outside of Havana, I said, I think it's time to leave. And of course they said, all Americans out, and caught the first plane to Miami. It was a $49 plane trip, so you can imagine we had a good time. I had never been out of the United States before, so my first trip on a plane, out of the country, was to Havana, and it was like stepping into paradise. It was just wonderful.
And once you came back to the States, that's when you started playing your first
Well,
Latin bands, or no?
Yeah, no, I was already playing with Latin bands, but not the main ones yet. Starting like maybe 1961, I was playing with Harvey Verne and with Randy Carlos and, the Borscht Belt kind of guys, and then I kind of stepped it up and started playing with a little better bands, with Randy Carlos, and then with Tito Rodriguez, then with Pacheco. In 1964, I played with Pacheco at the World's Fair. And that's when I got the idea of the two trumpets. Actually, it was in Lakewood. I was playing in Lakewood, New Jersey, with some more. This was like the winter home of the Jewish hotels. So we used to go there in the winter, and Joe Cuban would be playing in one hotel, and Tito Puente in another, and me in another. But I was just starting to be a band leader. But after I found my direction on what sound, and I started writing, I started rehearsing the first orchestra, Harlow, and there was a little club in New York called the Chez Jose, right in front of the Museum of Natural History on West 77, that was owned by a guy named Joe Artanis. And he was married to my trumpet player's wife's sister. All right, so he was related to my trumpet player. And I said, Artanis, that doesn't sound very Hispanic. He says, yes, but spelled backwards, it's Sinatra. He was a big Frank Sinatra fan, Artanis Sinatra. Okay, I understand where that's coming from. He changed his name, professional name, to Artanis. So we worked there every Friday night for about a year. And we were honing our skills and writing new material and writing new songs and writing arrangements for this trumpet-trombone combination. And I was still very Cuban influenced, and I had I had a couple of Jewish guys in the band. I had Mark Weinstein in the band, Mike Flamhaft in the band, and who were really great musicians and helped me a lot. But basically, I used Chocolate Monteros, from Cuba, and Monguito El Único Quijad from Pacheco's band, Hanny Alvarez, great Puerto Rican bomba plena composer, and a singer named Felo Brito, who I met in Cuba, who was a dancer with Jose Fajardo's band, and wanted to be a singer, and I gave him a shot, and I did my first album with him on vocals. He only lasted one album, then Monguito took over from him. But I always had this Cuban influence. I used to keep the rhythm section in the back of the band and the horns in the front like they used to do in Cuba. But later on it changed and it got reversed again. But because the people really wanted to see the rhythm guys, they wanted to see the congas and the timbales in front rather than in back.
Were you identifying at that time like that you were kind of passing as Latino, or were you a Jewish kid who liked Latin?
No, I was everybody. Well, I came onto the scene. I had a Beatle haircut, no mustache. I had this little Beatle, very short Beatle hair, and started to dress a little modern. And don't forget, the Hispanics at that time were still wearing peg pants and pistol pockets and pointy shoes and ties and jackets. And there were some clubs in New York where you couldn't get into unless you had a jacket and a tie. And if you came and you didn't have them, they used to rent it to you. They used to rent you a jacket. They used to rent you, of course, they were 3 sizes too big. You used to hang over with stains on the ties. And so, I'm speaking as a Californian, these old Hebrew places in New York. But it was quite interesting times. And then once I signed with Fania, I kind of had the same agent as Tito Puente, a man by the name of Jose Cubello, who was a fine pianist and good band leader at the time, and he decided to become an agent. And so people would come and buy Tito Puente. They say, well, if you want Tito Puente, you got to take Harlow. They say, who's Harlow? Say, never mind, you take Harlow. I mean, the band used to go for $250, $300 for the whole band. And I mean, we made $20 a piece or $25 a piece, but we worked 4 or 5 nights a week. And like I said before, my rent was very low, and I was living in a cold water flat in a village, and it was a lot of fun. We were just hippies, and we didn't care. But later on, I got a little more serious, and we started selling a few records, and it really wasn't until 1970 maybe. Ishmael Miranda was already in my band. He was a little young teenager that I took in that became a big hit. And I had 10 single good-looking guys in my band. So when you got 10 single good-looking guys in the band and we're making a little noise, you had 100 girls that followed the 10 guys. And if you had 100 girls that followed the 10 guys, you had 300 guys that followed the 100 girls. So we had 400 people everywhere we went. So it was kind of easy, after that. And once I did the La Catera album in the early 70s, they kind of gave me the name Judío Maravilloso. I was in the middle of this solo of La Catera, a very intense piano solo. Alberto yelled out from one side of the room, here comes the Maravilloso, because that was the same name as Arsenio. And I was a fanatic of Arsenio. They called Arsenio El Ciego Maravilloso, the blind marvel, because he was blind and he was great, and he said, ahora viene el maravilloso, and Junior Gonzalez yelled the other side, el judío maravilloso, the Jewish marvel. And the name kind of stuck with me. It seems that the people in South America found it very difficult to pronounce the name Larry Harlow. The L's kind of disappeared somewhere. So they would call me Harry Harlow, Carlo Harlow, Barry Farlow, Shmuel O'Darlow. I mean, I never got the right name anywhere in South America, but they did know Judío Maravilloso. So the next album that I made, I called it El Judío Maravilloso. It became a big hit, and the name kind of stuck all these years. And I wasn't the only Jewish guy in Latin music. There were quite a few, but not too many made it as a band leader. A couple of great sidemen like Mark Weinstein and Barry Rogers, I can name Alfredito, if you go back, Al Levy, who wound up having a very tragic life after his musical life, but that's another story. And Harvey Verne, there were a few that made a little noise, but I kind of stuck to it. I got in on producing. I learned how to be a record producer. I learned how to be a recording engineer. I went to school and I studied and I got on the Grammy committees and I just nosed my way in. Married a few Hispanic girls along the way, and my Spanish got better, and I started to be able to do interviews in Spanish and documentaries in Spanish, and kind of got really good at what I did. And became a Santero in 1975 and got a lot of respect from the elder Cubans and Puerto Rican communities.
Before we get to the Santero story, because I actually want to focus on that a
I
little.
don't want to get too much into
But
it.
can you tell us about your relationship to the bata drum?
Okay. The bata drum is a two-sided African drum that comes in a set of three. There's the iya, which is the mother, which is the big one. The etotale, which is the small one, and I forgot the name, whatever it is. But the ingenious thing about these rhythms, according to Fernando Ortiz, is that at no time you have three drummers playing six heads with six hands. At no time do the three drummers hit the drum at the same time with the same hand. It's a very complex rhythmic patterns that are going on. And this started out in Nigeria, in the Yoruba country, as accompaniment to religious songs, religious chants. From the religious chants, it filtered down when they finally got to Cuba and Puerto Rico. The bata became a conga drum and was used in secular music, and in bembes and in rumbas and in polques, outside, outdoors, in these little solars, these little communities where people would do rumba. Rumba was for the tourists. When the tourists came to Cuba, say, "Look at me," very, very clever. "Look at me," which is the religion. "Look at me, here I am. Look at me," and they would sing more, not so much religious chants, but more secular music, and it became a rumba. And then, of course, the dance came from the rhythms. So the bata became the conga drum. The bata was used in mainly religious ceremonies. I kind of felt that the bata kind of fits in very well with charanga music, with music of the courts of Spain, with the violins and the flutes, because charanga music is more in a two feel than in a four feel. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's kind of more two feel than a four feel, like the mambo and the cha-cha. And I integrated the bata. I wasn't the first one, but I kind of popularized it in a couple of songs that I used, especially La Catera. And it worked very well in Latin dance music, and now I use it all the time. But now it's a little much more secular than it was from before. But a very complex instrument. Of course, females are not allowed to participate, but nowadays there are some females that play very well. So, but it, very interesting, primitive instrument.
Were Jews more interested in Latin music than kind of the general white populace? And if so, why?
Say that again.
Were Jewish people more interested in Latin music, more passionate about Latin music than general white?
The Irish? Yes.
if so, why?
Oh. What they call that dance that the Irish do?
The jig.
The jig? No, the summer dance. What do they call it?
River dance.
River dance, right? I mean, how can you compare river dance to the Mambo? I mean, what a break. But the Latin people, the Jewish people, supported Latin music. Now we can go back to the 30s when the first cruise ships went to Havana. You know the story of the St. Louis, right? The St. Louis was a ship that was the last ship out of Germany in World War II that brought Jews from Germany to South America and was turned back in Havana and rode around for 40 or 50 days outside of Havana. It was a very famous story. But right before that, the Jews that were escaping, the Sephardic Jews that were escaping Turkey and on the outskirts of, not in Germany per se, or even that went from Turkey to Germany. In Germany, they had to get out, and they came via ship to Havana and lived in Havana before they came to the United States. I have an upstairs neighbor that's just told me some fantastic stories of the night of the book burning, that when he left Germany that night, and was stopped at the Belgian border by the Gestapo and paid off. There was one nice Belgian cop that got him off, and they went from there and they got on a ship, went to Havana. They were antique dealers, and the brother of one lived in Turkey and sent them all these Persian rugs and Turkish rugs to Havana to sell, to start a new life. And Obama, of course, the Batista regime confiscated all the rugs. He never got one. And then when he came to the United States, and he opened an antique store in the 50s on 3rd Avenue somewhere, and Mrs. Batista came to buy antiques from him. So he charged her $10,000 extra to make up for the rugs that he lost when he went to Havana. But the Jewish people got to Havana early, and especially the ones who here that went on cruise ships and they learned all these dances, and then they brought these dances back to the United States, and nobody knew anything about it. I mean, the first Latin hit was, I think, the Peanut Vendor. Dun, 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 dun. Became the first hit in the Spanish language in this country, which is probably in the mid-30s somewhere. And then Arthur Murray, who was a very famous dance instructor who had a TV program in the 50s, picked up on it. And he used to teach the mambo, and he opened up all these dance studios all across these major cities in the United States. The Jewish people were affluent enough to go to Havana on vacation. They were affluent enough to take dance lessons. And in the Catskill Mountains, where there were hundreds of hotels, all the children, they made their children learn the mambo and learn the cha-cha and take dance lessons by the pool. And there's some excellent footage, which I'm going to play for you in a few seconds, about the mambo mix. A little 10-minute documentary that some friends made for me. So they learned how to dance these dances. It was part of their, not the Jewish culture, it was Latin culture, but the Jews loved to dance the mambo. And they picked up on it. Wednesday night at the Palladium was white night. And when I mean white night, I meant 90% Jewish night, you know. Of course, it was always a trickle crossover, but Wednesday was when the Jews went to the Palladium, and Friday was when the Hispanics went, and Saturday was when the African Americans went, and, you know. And so it was. The owner of the Palladium used to say, "I don't care what color you are, as long as you bring the green." As long as you bring the money. And there was times in the Palladium where the Palladium was the place where you wanted to be seen. The movie stars were there, the drug dealers were there, this was it. There were different sections all over the place. The great dancers stayed over there, the black people stayed over there, the neophytes were there, but the Jews were all over. And they became really very good dancers, and especially because of the Catskills, and kept the music going for many, many years. And it wasn't until later on that the Hispanics became as good dancers as the Jews. But it was a lot of fun.
Could you maybe just return a little bit to the Palladium era, and could you just describe for us, like, you know, A, were you a dancer in the Palladium ever, and B, what was it like in that room? Like, what did it feel like to be there?
Oh, first of all, I learned how to dance late in life, you know, but I got pretty good at it. I mean, I wasn't good enough to be in the mambo shows. I mean, I wasn't number 46 like Louis Machina. Those guys. They had a guy named Louis Machine, Louis Machina, who was one of the best dancers at the Palladium, who tragically got shot in the spine and was unable to walk when he was in his mid-30s or something like that. But he was a fabulous dancer. Matter of fact, he's still around if you want to talk to him. He's got like a beauty supply company up in the Bronx somewhere, but I do have his email and stuff. But I went to the Palladium mainly to see the bands. You know, I would stand in front of Tito Puente and collect his drumsticks, and then the second reason I went was for the women. I mean, they were the most gorgeous, hottest, Hispanic ladies in New York City, hanging out. If I was a better dancer, I would have scored better with the girls, but I wasn't that great a dancer. But I got by. You know, if I danced with a Jewish girl, I was okay. I got by. But if I danced with the Hispanic girls, I was definitely on the low end. But it was quite an experience just to hear all of these bands that were playing there. I mean, the battles between Puente, Rodriguez, and Machito were infamous. Went on for many, many years. Used to see all the bands from South America, all the bands from Cuba, from Puerto Rico. Cortillo and his combo used to knock me out all the time. I never really had a chance to play there. I was kind of too young at the time. But Harvey, I think, played there once.
You mentioned before that there was kind of white night, Hispanic night, black night.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
90%. It was always a trickling.
so with all of that, with all these different groups listening to each other's music and dancing to each other, did this translate in your experience into real social life integration, or was it just a kind of cultural thing that never?
Well, it really wasn't an integration. I mean, the Wednesday was white night. I mean, it was 95% white people, whether they were Italian or Jews or, Irish or whatever, it didn't make any difference. If they liked the mambo, they were there on Wednesdays. So, of course, the real fanatics and the real great dancers were there every night, so it really didn't matter, but it was the start of a movement, not only of the dance itself, but of the music itself, and the rise of Puente and Machito. It was the home of the mambo. This was the place where it was like a big ballroom that held 1,000 people, and at that time it was unheard of. I mean, I always thought the Corso was huge. It held 500 people. And later on, I went back and looked at the place. Well, it's tiny. Compared to we played stadiums for 50,000, 60,000 people.
So would you say then it's more accurate to say that Latin music was a soundtrack for Jewish life than it is to say that that Jews and Latinos actually were hanging out?
Yes, most definitely. They weren't hanging out. Yeah. Except the musicians. The musicians were in the Jewish hotels and were integrating, if you know what I mean, and having a good time with the Latin women, with the Jewish women. The husbands would come up and on the weekends, and then during the week they go back to New York to work, and then the Latin guys took over and just jumped on everybody. And the Jewish women loved it. So not only was I making love to this wonderful Jewish woman, but I was making love to her daughter in the afternoons and giving the husband conga lessons on the weekends for $50 a pop. And he used to say to me, listen, here's an extra 10. Would you keep an eye on my wife? I think she's fooling around with somebody. So it was all part of growing up.
So, Santeria.
Before we get to that, how do they bill a Wednesday night?
No, they didn't bill it as white night. It was just open. It just happened. It could have been the Sunday, white night, but it just turned out to be Wednesday.
Did Latin women like to go with Jewish guys, or was it just Larry Harlow that they liked to go with?
No, they did like Jewish guys. Well, I think Latin women, if they developed a relationship with Jewish guys and felt themselves taking themselves up a step socially and economically, they were always looking for the Jewish doctor. They knew how to mambo. Was there such an animal? Yes, I'm sure there were. Because I have a lot of Dr. Jewish friends that are great mambo dancers.
Can you describe the Catskills to young people who never went there? Describe the scene.
Well, these were small, not small hotels. Some of them were quite large, at Grossingers and the Concord, and some of them were really big, and Kutches, and some of them were medium-sized hotels. But no matter what it was a vacation time. The Catskills started as a vacation passage for Jewish vendors. The history of it. And my father's family, they were social directors in the Catskills when they first started. Everybody used to work for room board just to get away from the heat in the summer. And it was an hour and a half. Sometimes the trip took 3 hours. You know, I used to remember my father had an old 49 Ford, and just to get up to Wurtsboro Hill used to take an hour and a half and 4 quarts of oil just to get over the first hill till we got to the Catskills. And we used to make that trip, you know, every week, you know, to go up there on the weekends. But after a while, we stayed for the whole summer, and then I wound up spending most of my summers as youth in the bungalow colonies or before the hotels. And then my first job in the Catskills, I think, was in 1953. And I played with my periodontist, who's now periodontist, who was a saxophone. I had 2 saxophones, drums, and piano. And we slept in one room. We had 2 double beds. We slept together. I slept together with the saxophone player. And we made $15 a week, room and board. And then we doubled on Saturday night. We used to, after we finished at the hotel, we used to run over to this. But this was a real tiny, small hotel. And as a matter of fact, it's still there. It's called the Motel now. It's a motel. But it's still in Monticello, New York. And every once in a while I go up there, but there's nothing left. Absolutely nothing.
Were the Latin bands, when they played the Catskills, or specifically, let's say, Latin musicians, was it? I mean, they were the hired entertainment.
Yes.
It was not like they were there socializing and.
No, they were the entertainment, and you know, it was a room and board kind of thing because you had to play, you know, 6 nights a week. You had one night off, and you got great food. You know, you had 3 squares every day of great Jewish food, and you know, salami, pastrami, and lox and bagels, and flank and Cantonese style. You know, but it was a lot of fun, and you were outdoors. You had all your sports activities. You had the lake, you had the swimming, you had the this, you had the that. And in the daytime, we didn't have to work, so we were just running around having a good time, and you know, and socializing.
How did Tito Puente pass the time when he was up there?
Drunk most of the time, stoned. I'm writing my memoirs, and of course my hero was Tito Puente, and I find it very difficult to tell a lot of stories about Tito because a lot of them are booze related or drug related, and I really don't want to bring down his image. And so I'm having a tough time with that. But it was sex. You know, the theme of the rock and rollers was sex, drug, and rock and roll, and the theme of the mambo musicians was fuck, suck, and mambo. You know, so you can leave that in if you want. But that was our anthem, and we just had a good time, and we stayed stoned and partied. It was all party.
You told us a great Tito Puente story when we were last here about his specialty, his signature move with newly married, or people who got married at the Catskills.
I don't remember that.
I'll tell you afterwards. You told me he had a specialty, which was if somebody got married in the Catskills.
He tried to grab. Yeah. No, I don't think that was Tito Puente. I think that was Sonny Rossi. Sonny Rossi was an Italian salsa band leader that had a band at the Tamarack Lodge. And his whole claim to fame was he used to go after the brides on their honeymoon, who were there on their honeymoons, and try to cop a sexual encounter with a newlywed. And he was quite successful at it. And it wasn't Tito Puente, but it was fun. Like, for instance, the guys in the Joe Cuba band wound up speaking Yiddish after so many years. Talk to Jimmy Sabater. He speaks perfect Yiddish. He's amazing. And Cheo Feliciano. We used to run from my hotel to go to the Pines Hotel to see them play. And Harvey and I used to go, wow, listen to these guys playing, you know. Because they had their own little style, and they had a little sextet. It was a small band. But they were complete with a sextet, whereas if I had a sextet, I was incomplete because I didn't have all my horns, and I didn't have, I was playing with a cut-down version of my band.
So was the Catskills a footnote in Latin music history, or did it play an active role?
I think it played an active role in New York Latin music. Don't forget, the West Coast was another development, a whole entirely different scene. Florida came much later. Puerto Rico was always a little behind New York, but don't forget Puerto Rico, your language was Spanish. So you had 200 radio stations that played Latin music. In New York, you had 2 stations AM that played Latin music. The American stations would not play anything in the Spanish language. So you're up against, radio-wise, you're up against it. You didn't have a lot to go for it. It wasn't until later on, until the first FM station. And now there are 8 or 9 Latin radio stations in New York, so at least it gets some play.
How common is it for a non-Cuban to be officially welcomed into Santeria?
It's fairly common. I mean, I know Chinese people, I know Italian people that got into Santeria, got into the religion. It's the same God. I mean, there's only one God. How you go about relating to that God is a matter of choice. I mean, when you go to church to pray and you're buying a candle, you pay for a candle right? So instead, I buy a chicken. You know, I sacrifice a chicken, or I sacrifice a duck, you know, or a goat, or a lamb.
And are you still practicing? Are you still practicing actively?
Yes, I have my whole altar over there. You know, this is a New York apartment. You know, everything is hidden away. For instance, here's my piano right there. You can't even see it. You're leaning on my piano, but it's hidden. You know, so you have to take advantage of the small size of these apartments. So most of my furniture is all built in, and my Santos are very private over there in the corner. And I do what I got to do when I have to do my animal sacrifices. My wife leaves. She says, "Call me when it's over," you know. And the cats freak out because they hear the birds, and then, you know, I lock them in the bathroom and stuff, but they still hear them scratching around them. So they smell them or something, so they know something's up. So I got to lock them in a room, and you know, and we use the blood, and then we cut them up and eat them. You know, so nothing goes to waste.
And are you part of a local practicing?
Well, my godmother, my godfather died a few years ago. My godmother lives in Miami, and I see her there. But I have my family. I have my godchildren. I got 9 godchildren now, and it works for me. I made Santo in 1975, and yeah, my mother is this obese, heavy-set woman. Here I am. I run down to Florida because when I got my reading, my final reading of the night I made Santo, the Santos told me, "Watch out for your mother. She's going to die real soon." So I wanted to go talk to my mother, so I got on the first plane, and here I am. Shaved head, dressed all in white, with all my beads and my things, and newborn, you know, just baptized again, and I go see my mother. I said, "Mom, I really want you to be careful walking in the street and driving in your car." And now I probably could have saved her life if she would have become a santera, if she would have entered the religion and, you know, got baptized. And how are you going to tell a 70-year-old Jewish woman, you know, you got to sleep on the floor, you got to drink animal blood, and you got to do this and blah, blah, blah. She's never going to go for that. And she looked at me, she said, "Wow, you look like a good humor man." You know, like an ice cream salesman, you know, an ice cream guy. So, 3 weeks after I left Miami, my mother got hit by an Amtrak train on one of those railroad crossings in her car, and she died. But I believe.
And are you still observant as a Jew?
Oh yeah, also. I take care of business, but it's the same God, you know, like I said. But I gained a lot of respect by entering the Lukumi religion. Matter of fact, at one time I was the only Santero in the Funny All-Stars. So there was the Jewish kid, there's the Santero, and then I'm also 1 week older. I was 1 week older than Tito Puente in the religion. He made Santo like a week after me. So, you know, when you're younger than an older Santero, you have to prostrate yourself in front of them to get blessed. So Tito Puente would have to lie down on the floor in order for me to bless him, and he hated that, you know. So every time there was a ceremony or something happened, he says, "Harlow gonna be there today," because he never didn't want to go, because he didn't want to have to bow down to me, you know. And I hated it too, because there's my mentor, you know, my idol, and I'm on the floor prostrate, you know, in front of me. So, but we had a few laughs about it over the years.
Did you ever get any grief from fellow Latinos or Latin musicians who thought you'd gone too far?
No, I didn't get any grief. I got much more respect. And they knew that if they were messing with me, I was going to mess heavy with them. So, as time went on, Rowena became Santo, Adalberto became Santo. Celia, in all her years, never entered the religion. She respected it and everything, but she never became a priestess or anything like that.
Could you tell us?
But Joe Manazzi, who's Italian, became a Santo. Harry Vigiano became a Santo. So we all around the mid-70s, that's when the Santeria thing was getting really heavy.
Other than the sacrifices and the ritual, how does being a Santo affect your thinking and how you view life?
My thinking? Well, you know, I mean, I'm out to protect myself from outside influences. I try to make the playing field equal so that I can do my thing without any outside interference. Because don't forget, the Latinos have a lot of envidia, especially for an outsider, a white boy, Jewish, Italian, whatever. Here's a white guy who's not one of us, playing better than we are, and making money, and doing his thing. So they were very jealous of me, and skeptical, and this and that. Not so much the public, but more of the people in the business, in the Latin music business. The promoters, I mean, it took a long time to gain the respect of the promoters because of who I was. I was here as a Harlow. What kind of name is Harlow? So people thought orchestra was my first name for a while. Until I changed it. Instead of being orchestra Harlow, I became Larry Harlow. But the first 10 albums or so, I was 20 albums, I was orchestra Harlow. Because of my name, I didn't want to put my whole name down. So, but whatever. But once they heard me play, and once I started speaking Spanish, and really was into the whole culture and Spanish. I'm more Hispanic than I am Jewish right now.
Why didn't you want to put your whole name down?
Well, it was hard to pronounce, and then also why push it? Don't forget the H in Spanish is almost silent. It's Harlow. And the L is almost silent too. The L is sort of an H. So it became Harry Harlow or Carlo Harlow. They just didn't know how to say it, I mean, now everybody knows, but it took a long time to get accepted by the promoters, by the other musicians, and my peers and by the band leaders. Maybe because I was just good at it. I was white. It didn't matter if I was Jewish or Italian, but just non-Hispanic.
You mentioned Celia Cruz.
Yes.
You worked with her?
Many times.
Anything you want to say about
Very
her?
professional, wonderful woman, respectful of everybody. Didn't fulfill a few promises she made to me, but it was not her fault. She was pressured by the record company. And when I wrote my opera in '73, the only opera, I wrote a song especially for her. She had retired in Mexico and was doing like novellas, soap operas and commercials, and really didn't want to be on the tropical music scene, the Cucci-Frito circuit. And she gave up a place here, and I wrote the song for her. And I said, would you first of all, there were only one or two female people that could sing tropical music. So her being the best of the lot, because I was a big Sonora Matancera fan when I was young, and I used to go see them play every Wednesday night in Kew Gardens and Queens Boulevard. And Moby Walters, who was a Jewish guy, owned this nightclub over there. And so I learned really how to dance with Sonora Matancera, and she was the vocalist with Sonora for many, many years. But she didn't want to have to deal with the promoters and the little Cucci-Frito circuit here. But she wasn't as big a star as she was in the last 20 years of her life. And I wrote the song for her, I sent it to her, and then she agreed to come up and record it with me, and agreed to do the concert at Carnegie Hall. And after that, Masucci signed up to Fania and put out her first couple albums, and then she came back to New York and became a big star again. Kind of like rejuvenated her career a little bit.
What do you think the legacy will be of Fania Records?
Well, it's classic Afro-Cuban music, New York style. They had a 15-year run that was equal. I mean, they just set the pace. They started a new movement. Jerry Masucci is, I don't want to go into his business practices and stuff like that, but he did a lot for the music. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here who I am now. I wouldn't have made Latin music my career. I wouldn't have got to see the world. I wouldn't have made some money. I'd be somewhere else. I don't know where I'd be. Probably a school teacher or a college professor or something. They did a lot for a lot of musicians and put hardcore Latin salsa music, Afro-Cuban music in the forefront, and kept the dance alive. And did a lot for the music.
I want to ask you about a couple of specific albums. First, I want to start with Omi. Can you tell us the history of that record, what it is, how you decided to do it?
I was influenced by The Who, by Tommy. The Who did the first concept album. By concept album, I mean one song related to the next song and told a story. The whole album had no stop from beginning to end. It wasn't like most albums have 10, 12 songs, they have no relation to one to the other. This told a story. I said, Omi, I said, Tommy. I had a friend named Omi Sands, who was a singer in Puerto Rico that passed away. I said, Tommy, Omi's one letter different. A deaf and dumb and blind pinball player, a deaf and dumb and blind conga player. So I wrote all new songs, loosely based on a deaf and dumb and blind boy who all he did was sit in the town square and play the conga. Had nothing to do with Tommy, but except that it was a concept album, and it had a feel me, touch me kind of feel me, touch me, heal me kind of song in it, but totally all original music and everything, and utilizing Fania's stable of singers, Pete Conde and Checo on the flute, and Alberto and Junior Gonzalez, who had just started with me. I wrote it for Miranda, but Miranda had just left my band. Junior was just starting, so Junior was thrown into the mix of all these great people with no experience. Matter of fact, he had his two front teeth were cut in half. He was very self-conscious. He would always bend his lip over. So I finally sent him, got some cap, get his teeth capped, and got him back on track. But it was his first album, and thrown in, and then I had an idea of mixing the classical orchestra with Latin music, which had never been done before, and do a stage presentation of this. And we got a Thursday night at Carnegie Hall. We sold out both shows, and then took it to Puerto Rico, did 2 more shows in Puerto Rico, with a 50-piece orchestra, violins and oboes and English horns and timpanis and etc. And it was very exciting. Here I was in Toscanini's dressing room, peeing his toilet, and felt real good about it. They have his baton in a glass case, and there's a little peephole in the dressing room where you can look out in the Stars dressing room and see the whole Carnegie Hall. So it was quite exciting. And it was the first concept album, and it's still a classic to this day. I'm still hoping to put it on again this year. I have 2 big projects this year, one at Lincoln Center. I'm doing the Salsa Suite at Lincoln Center with Ruben Blades with a 40-piece orchestra. And I'm taking that, and then I'm doing the same thing with Luis Enriquez in South America and in Puerto Rico, doing the same piece of music.
And what year was Omi?
73.
And then in 78 you did Raza Latina.
Right.
Which tell us about that
I'm doing now. La Raza Latina tells this, well, it's a suite. It runs about 45, 50 minutes. I can stretch it to an hour. It tells the history of Latin music in musical form, from its African roots all the way up to the last movement I call the future. And I was lucky to grab Ruben Blades for that performance before he started with Willie Colon. And he did a magnificent job. He's a very talented musician and a wonderful man. And we're doing it again at Lincoln Center, outdoors, free. So August 14th, and then take it on the road, you know, hopefully have a good time with it. And I haven't done it, I never did that live. Only I did once live, but I hope to do that again. And there's nothing like that. Most of the shows that have been played around are just the same old Grand Combo, Gilberto Santa Rosa, you know, 5 acts with one band, backing them up and playing their hits, and that's the end of it. And people are kind of tired of the same old crap over. So I think Omi and Lalas Latino will bring back a little excitement to the stage again.
You also had a side project at one point that was kind of a psychedelic rock band, like a prog rocky band, didn't you?
Now you're dating me now. Then in 1969, I pulled a couple guys from my band and a couple of guys from Blood, Sweat and Tears, and we did an album called Ambergris, Well Puke, you know. We should have left us hoping for a left hook, which we got. And we closed the Fillmore East. That was our claim to fame. We were the last act at the Fillmore in New York City. And we did an album and a half, and we had a lot of fun. We went on the road. We did tours with the Grateful Dead, Rod Stewart, and it stayed smashed out of a bird for a year and a half.
And it sounds nothing like your other material.
Well, I had done an album called Me and My Monkey, which was a Beatles song, and I did it like in a crossover Latin in English with a Latin kind of beat to it. And I said, well, if we could do this, why can't we play rock and roll? And I made a band kind of like it was kind of like a Blood, Sweat and Tears band, 10 years after band, you know, not 10 years after. What was that band called? I don't know, the Chicago, you know, that kind of thing with 4 horns and a couple of guys from my band, and we had a big contract with Paramount Records and had some fun.
Last thing I want to ask you is, you've been focusing on your career as a player, as a musician, but you've had done tremendous work as a producer and engineer as well. Could you talk about your decision to move behind the boards as well as being in front?
Well, right after I did Omi, I was approached by a woman from BMI named Elizabeth Granville, who asked me if I wanted to be involved with the Grammys, with the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences in New York. I said, sure. She says, you know, they give scholarships, you know, to people to study audio engineering, and so I got a scholarship to the Institute of Audio Research in the Village, and I went and I studied for a year down there. And to me, it was more mathematics, and I was kind of more of a hands-on guy. And I learned a lot about the movement of sound and how sound worked. And don't forget, this is the time when electronics was just making its first boost from 4-track to multi-track. You know, and, after the Beatles did the first 4-track recording, then it went to 8-track, and then 12-track, and then 16, and then 24, and then 48, 32, and then 48. And the machines were being invented every week. There was a new machine. So you had to kind of like keep up with the times. And I kind of experimented around with new stuff, but I kind of felt that being an engineer took away from my production guys, because I was really pushing buttons, you know, basically, and, you know. So I'd rather have an engineer and tell an engineer what to do, because I knew what to tell him to do. And then I experimented with I did the first Latin quadraphonic album, actually the only Latin quadraphonic album. And then I did the first Latin digital album in the 80s. And so I was always at the forefront of the electronics of part of the business. As far as production was concerned, I was really fast, and I used to knock out an album a week for Fania, and wound up producing more than 300 albums for them, of young, up-and-coming bands. I had a very good relationship. I had to handle artists and all their quirks. I knew how to get the best performance out of them that I could possibly do. I mean, sometimes I'd throw everybody out of the studio, turn off the lights, and say, okay, let's get naked, you know, and get a performance out of an artist with no clothes on, you know. That's what it took. That's what it took. But I knew how to relate to artists very well, and I was a good worker for Masucci, and produced for the All Stars, the majority of their recordings until I left the group and the group fell apart. But there's word that we might do a final tour this summer. It's a scuttlebutt. I haven't heard anything definite yet, but I think Bobby Valentine's putting it together, so that might happen again. But I loved working in the studio. I had a lot of fun, and you know, in those days we didn't make a lot of money. I know, but now I get a lot of money to produce, and I've been doing crossover stuff with Mars Volta, we both from Tasma from Austin, and getting calls from different rock and roll groups and to play on the recordings.
Even though you're still a very young man, when you look back at this tremendous career and this tremendous life story, not only that's yours, but the story of your parents and your grandparents, it's an incredible story. When you look back on it, what do you want to be, or do you think is your
When I grow up?
your most important legacy as an artist?
Wow. I guess the trumpet trombone sound is really, I mean, now every band is trumpets and trombones, every Latin band that comes up. Also, make the first concept albums, Omi and La Raza Latina were two really very important works of mine. And having just a really swinging, typical Cuban band with a New York sound. I'm kind of a personal guy. I love traveling. I loved playing all over the world. I never would have got to see all these places. I'm just happy I brought a lot of happiness to a lot of people with my music. Goodbye.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us that we didn't ask?
Show me the money. Never made any big bucks, you know. If I had it all over to do again, I would have protected my rights a little better. Right from the very beginning, I would have been smarter. But now I have a lawyer for a son, so it's easy. My name is Larry Harlow. They call me the Judío Maravilloso, and this is my story.